Today, we're diving deep into the 2026 US Iran conflict. Using the reporting and analysis that's out there, we're going to piece together how this war started, the immediate fallout, and some of the really controversial theories about why it even happened in the first place. All right, let's get into it. You really can't talk about this war without starting right here, with this tweet from all the way back in 2011. Years before he was even president, Donald Trump made a pretty specific prediction that a sitting president would start a war with Iran just to get reelected. It's a statement that, well, became incredibly ironic. And then, boom, flash forward. That old prediction is just hanging in the air as we land on this date, February 28th, 2026, the day the talking stops and a US-led war on Iran becomes a reality. So that brings us to our first big question. How did we get here? How did a conflict that Trump himself once labeled a pathetic political move become the signature foreign policy event of his own presidency? It's kind of wild when you look at just how fast everything completely unraveled. I mean, look at this. On February 26th, we have mediators saying there's significant progress in the nuclear talks. Things are looking up. But just one day later, the U.S. introduces what sources called poison pill demands, basically insisting Iran dismantle everything. The talks completely stall, and then, less than 24 hours later, the bombs start falling. And that brings us to the operation itself, Epic Fury. This wasn't some slow buildup or gradual escalation. No, this was designed from the get-go to be one massive, overwhelming knockout blow. The whole strategy was built around this idea of a decapitation strike. So the goal isn't really to fight an army on the battlefield. It's to surgically remove the leadership, cut off the head of the snake, and hope the entire government and military command structure just collapses in on itself. And from a purely tactical point of view, in those first few hours, it worked. The US and Israel quickly confirmed they'd eliminated Iran's top leadership. We're talking Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, who'd been in power for more than 30 years, plus the top guys at the National Security Council and the Revolutionary Guard. Just gone. And the sheer scale of this is just staggering. This wasn't some sneaky, covert operation in the middle of the night. Sources are describing it as a wildly bold, daytime attack. Just try to picture that. Over 200 fighter jets, American stealth bombers, all operating in broad daylight. It was a message, a show of total air superiority designed to shock and awe. But that military dominance, it came at an unbelievable human cost. 180. That's the reported number of people killed in just one missile strike that hit a girls' elementary school in Minab. Most of them were students. It became the single deadliest event of the war's opening day. So how did the U.S. military explain this? Well, the official word came from CENTCOM. They pointed out that the school was right next to a barracks for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC. The suggestion, of course, was that this was a tragic accident, an unintended consequence of a strike on a legitimate military target. Well, you don't assassinate another country's entire leadership and see that kind of civilian death toll without expecting a response. And it came, all right? Iran launched what its own military called the most ferocious offensive operation in history. And right away, you get this perfect example of the information war, the fog of war. Iran's IRGC makes this huge claim. They hit the U.S. aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln with 4 ballistic missiles. CENTCOM's response? Just one word. Lie. They said the missiles didn't even come close. You've got 2 totally different realities being broadcast to the world at the same time. And Iran's response wasn't just focused on one target. No, this was a massive, coordinated attack. They launched a barrage of missiles and drones at U.S. and allied assets across the entire Middle East, from Israel all the way down to the UAE and Bahrain. And they weren't shy about it either. They put a hard number on their counterattack. The Iranian military claimed they had majorly affected 27 different U.S. and coalition bases. Now, whether every single one was a direct hit or not, just the ambition of targeting that many places at once, that was the message. So you have this chaotic military back and forth, but the shockwaves from this war went way beyond military targets. They basically set the whole region on fire and sent tremors right through the global economy. This right here, this was the moment the shooting war became an economic war. On March 2nd, Iranian drones slammed into the Ras Tanura refinery in Saudi Arabia. And look, this isn't just any old refinery. It is the largest in the entire Middle East, a absolutely critical piece of the world's energy supply chain. And the effect was instantaneous. That attack, plus all the instability in the shipping lanes, caused global oil prices to spike by 10%, pretty much overnight. It's a stark reminder of how a conflict over there can hit your wallet over here. So while all that's going on, back in Iran, they're scrambling to figure out who's even in charge. What finally emerges is this three-man leadership council. And it's a really interesting, some would say unstable, mix. You've got a hardline cleric as the interim supreme leader, but then a president who's seen as being more aligned with reformists. Back in Washington, though, the public message was one of total success. President Trump came out and said that the strikes had worked. They want to talk, he said, and I have agreed to talk. The message being sent was clear. We used overwhelming force, and it brought them to the negotiating table. But, yeah, that's not how Iran's new leaders saw it. Not even close. They immediately and flatly rejected any idea of talks. For them, it was simple. The assassination of their head of state had crossed the line. There was absolutely nothing to discuss. So you had a complete and total diplomatic stalemate. So that kind of leads us to our final section. If the official reason for the war, forcing Iran to the negotiating table, was dead on arrival, people started asking, well, what was really going on here? And that's where you start to see these alternative and pretty controversial explanations pop up. The question that really drives all this speculation is an old one, summed up here in a piece of analysis from Rachel Maddow. Cui bono? Who benefits? If the official story doesn't quite add up, you have to ask, who actually stood to gain from this conflict? So that brings us to the big question, right? Why? Why did this happen now? Well, let's look at the official narrative, the stated reasons for this war. Okay, so according to the US and Israel, this whole thing, Operation Epic Fury, was about stopping Iran from getting a nuke. They wanted to, and I'm quoting here, raise their missile program and annihilate their navy. The story was that this was about removing an existential threat to Israel and stopping Iran's network of allies, the Axis of Resistance, from attacking US troops. They really framed it as a defensive move, to bring stability. But you know how these things go. The minute the official story dropped, people started questioning it. An alternative narrative started to bubble up. One that suggested the real reasons for this war were, well, a lot darker. Yeah, so the big question became, is national security really the whole story here, or was something else going on? Leaked intel, insiders, they all started pointing to a different motivation. Maybe it wasn't about an imminent threat at all, but about something else. Hidden leverage, maybe? Political pressure? And this is where things get really explosive. The alternative theory centers around a name we all know, Jeffrey Epstein, and this alleged web of influence and blackmail. So get this. Just weeks before the war kicks off, the Department of Justice drops over 3 million pages of files on Jeffrey Epstein. And what's buried in there is absolutely staggering. The documents lay out this theory that Epstein wasn't just some sick predator. He was an intelligence asset, specifically for Mossad, Israel's intelligence agency, and his job? To build these networks of influence, to blackmail and control powerful people like Donald Trump, Jared Kushner, even former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak. And this right here, this is the core of it. A declassified FBI report from January of that year, with a confidential source claiming point blank, U.S. President Donald Trump was compromised by Israel. The allegation is that through Epstein's network, they had leverage over him, financial, personal, you name it, and that this was how a foreign power could exert influence right inside the Oval Office. Now, we have to be super clear here. The White House came out and forcefully denied all of this. They called the allegations unfounded and false. But you can't ignore the timing, right? The Epstein files drop, and then boom, a sudden war with Iran. It's that sequence of events that has so many people speculating that this war wasn't a choice, but maybe the result of being backed into a corner. Okay, so if this blackmail theory holds any water, the next question is, why? Why force a war with Iran? Well, that leads us directly to this idea of the Greater Israel theory, and a window of opportunity that was supposedly closing fast. So what is the Greater Israel Project? Well, it's this theorized geopolitical goal for Israel to expand its territory and its influence all across the Levant and the Persian Gulf, basically to become the undisputed dominant power in the region. And according to this theory, there's one huge obstacle standing in the way of that goal: Iran. Take Iran off the board, and the path is clear. And here's the kicker. There's a sense of urgency. Critics like Tucker Carlson argue that according to some Israeli strategists, there was only a 3-year window to make this happen. The thinking was that the political landscape in America was about to shift, big time. Future presidents might not be so supportive. So, for them, the Trump administration was their last, best shot to pull this off. So here we are, left with two completely different realities. Two competing explanations for why this war even started. Let's just lay them out. On one side, you have the official reason, a preemptive strike to neutralize very real threats to the U.S. and Israel. Simple, clean, about national security. And on the other side, you have this alternative theory, a war that was kicked off by political blackmail, all in the service of a long-term Israeli strategy to reshape the entire region. So it all leaves you with a pretty profound question, doesn't it? In a world of secret files and public statements, how do we ever really know the truth about why a war begins? It makes you wonder, when the drums of war start beating, how much of the real story are we, the public, ever actually told?